Most people do not turn away from God in anger. They don't reject Him loudly. They don't announce their decision. They hesitate. Saint Francis learned this not by watching sinners fall, but by watching good people delay. People who prayed. People who believed. People who assumed they had time. And what troubled him most was this. Nothing seemed to happen when they waited. The night Francis learned this lesson was ordinary. No storm. No fasting. No sense of danger. The monastery had settled into silence. Oil lamps flickered softly against stone walls. The air was cool, steady, uneventful. Francis walked alone along the outer path, sandals scraping gently against worn stone. He had walked this path hundreds of times before. It required no attention. That was why the thought surprised him. Stop. It did not sound like a voice. It did not interrupt his mind. It rose quietly, like a thought that did not belong to him. Francis slowed. There was nothing in front of him. No obstacle. No sound. The night was still. He stood there, waiting for something to follow. Nothing did. No explanation arrived. No reason formed. After a moment, Francis smiled faintly at himself. "You're tired," he whispered. He shifted his weight and turned to continue walking. And then the feeling returned. Not stronger. Not urgent. But exact. As if something had placed a hand on the center of his chest, not to push, but to steady him. Francis stopped again. This time, he did not dismiss it. He felt something unsettling. The moment was not asking for action. It was asking to be noticed. That night, Francis was shown something. Not fire. Not judgment. He was shown delay. He saw people moving through their lives, ordinary lives filled with work, prayer, family, responsibility. And scattered throughout their days were moments like the one he had just felt. Small pauses. Quiet tugs. Unexplained interruptions. Each one felt optional. Each one felt harmless. Francis watched as people noticed these moments. And then stepped past them. "I'll do it later. I'll think about this tomorrow. This isn't important right now." Nothing bad happened. Life continued. Francis frowned. "They aren't refusing," he said. "No," the voice replied. "They are postponing." Francis watched more closely. Something subtle began to change. The pauses grew shorter. The sensitivity dulled. The moments came less often. Not because God stopped offering them, but because the people stopped recognizing them. The doors did not close. They faded. As if they had never been there at all. Francis felt a pressure in his chest. "What becomes of them?" he asked. The answer came quietly. "They live normal lives." The words disturbed him deeply. Francis saw these people pray. He saw them speak of faith. He saw them consider themselves obedient. Yet something had shifted, not outwardly, but inwardly. They had learned how to ignore what did not demand attention. And once learned, it became effortless. "This doesn't look like rebellion," Francis whispered. "It isn't," the voice replied. "It is neglect." Francis understood then why the moment was so dangerous. Because it did not feel like temptation. It felt reasonable. It felt calm. It felt like there would be time later. When Francis returned to the monastery, he could not unsee what he had been shown. He began to notice it everywhere. A brother pausing mid-task, then continuing. A thought dismissed. A prayer delayed. One evening, a young brother asked him, "How do I know when God is calling me?" Francis took a long time before answering. "You won't," he said finally. The brother looked confused. "It will not feel loud," Francis continued. "It will not arrive with certainty. It will feel easy to interrupt." From that day forward, Francis warned people differently. He spoke less about sin. Less about rules. He spoke about timing. He told them this. The most dangerous moment in your life will not feel urgent. It will feel small. It will feel like something you can return to later. People were unsettled by his words. Because they recognized the feeling. If you are listening now, and something feels uncomfortably familiar, that is not coincidence. Saint Francis warned that the moments that shape a life do not announce themselves. They appear quietly. They ask briefly. And they wait only once. Francis changed how he lived after that night. When something surfaced, even faintly, he stopped. He listened. He acted without demanding understanding. Because he had learned something most never do. Understanding usually arrives after the moment has been honored. Not before. And when Francis finally died, those beside him said his passing was peaceful. Not because he had lived perfectly. But because he had learned not to walk past what asked for his attention. If there is something you have been delaying. Not out of defiance. But out of comfort. Do not rush past that pause. Saint Francis warned that the most costly moments are the ones that feel easiest to ignore. And when they pass, they do not announce their absence. They simply stop asking. And the silence that follows feels exactly like peace. Until you realize what it replaced. And that is why the silence afterward is so deceptive. Because it does not feel like loss. It feels like relief. Saint Francis warned that when a moment is ignored often enough, it stops returning. Not in anger. Not in judgment. Simply, in agreement. The soul learns what the heart practices. At first, the pause is noticeable. Then familiar. Then invisible. Until one day, a person realizes they no longer stop at all. They move smoothly through their days. Efficiently. Reasonably. Without interruption. And they mistake that smoothness for peace. Francis said this was the most dangerous stage. Not when the moment first appears. But when it no longer does. Because by then, the soul has learned how to live without listening. He told those who would hear him. God does not always withdraw his call. Sometimes he honors your decision to walk past it. That warning unsettled people more than any talk of punishment ever could. Because it placed responsibility where it belonged. Not on heaven. But on attention. Francis knew something else too. The moment does not always return in the same form. Sometimes it comes back as regret. Sometimes as restlessness. Sometimes as a quiet sense that something important was missed, though you cannot name what. And sometimes, it never comes back at all. That is why Francis learned to fear comfort more than struggle. Struggle keeps the soul alert. Comfort teaches it to drift. So when something interrupts you, even now, When a thought lingers longer than it should. When a pause feels heavier than the moment requires. Do not hurry past it. Do not explain it away. Do not promise yourself you will return later. Because later is a story we tell ourselves. To make delay feel harmless. Saint Francis warned that the most decisive moments in a life are rarely dramatic. They are quiet. Brief. Almost polite. They ask once. And they wait just long enough. For you to decide. Who you are becoming. And when Francis spoke this way, people often misunderstood him. They thought he was asking for perfection. For constant vigilance. For a life lived in tension. He was not. He was warning them about something far subtler. He said the soul is not shaped by the moments we prepare for. It is shaped by the moments we dismiss. The ones we do not mark. The ones we do not pray about. The ones we barely remember an hour later. Francis had seen how easily a life could drift without ever choosing to drift. Not because someone stopped believing. But because they stopped responding. He noticed how delay trained the heart. How each ignored moment made the next one easier to pass by. How the conscience did not harden all at once, but softened, until it no longer resisted. And he warned that this softening felt kind. It felt merciful. It felt like peace. But it was not peace. It was quiet agreement. Agreement with distraction. Agreement with comfort. Agreement with the version of yourself that prefers not to be interrupted. Francis told them. The call you ignore does not accuse you. It adjusts to you. And one day, he said, you will look back and realize you did not choose this direction. You practiced it. This is why Francis did not urge people to search for signs. He urged them to notice pauses. Because a pause is where choice still lives. Once the pause disappears, choice follows it. And when the pause no longer comes, the soul does not panic. It settles. That is the danger. So if there is a moment you keep feeling small, unremarkable, easy to delay, do not ask whether it is important. Ask what ignoring it is teaching you. Because Saint Francis warned that the soul becomes fluent in whatever it repeats. And what you practice today, even quietly, even unintentionally, is what you will one day follow. Without realizing you ever decided to. That was the part Saint Francis could not forget. Because once a direction is chosen unconsciously, it no longer feels like a choice at all. It feels like who you are. Francis warned that this is how most lives are shaped, not by moments of passion or rebellion, but by quiet repetitions no one notices. The soul learns its posture slowly. It learns what to respond to. It learns what to dismiss. And once it learns, it stops asking questions. Francis had seen this happen. He had watched people who once paused easily begin to move without hesitation. Where there had once been stillness, there was now momentum. Where there had once been listening, there was now habit. They were not colder. They were smoother. And that smoothness frightened him. Because smoothness feels like peace, but it is often just the absence of resistance. Francis told his brothers that the soul becomes dangerous to itself when nothing interrupts it anymore. When days pass without friction. When prayer becomes automatic. When conscience no longer presses, but politely steps aside. He said, "Be careful when your life stops asking anything of you." Some thought he meant hardship. He did not. He meant attention. He meant that subtle discomfort you feel when something inside you hesitates, even though everything around you seems fine. Francis said that discomfort is often the last place truth still has access. Ignore it long enough, and it learns you are not listening. And then it leaves. Not in anger. In respect. Francis believed this was why some people reach the end of their lives confused. Not afraid, confused. They look back and cannot point to a single moment where they chose wrongly. Everything seemed reasonable at the time. Every delay made sense. Every pause was explained away. And yet, when they arrive at the end, something feels unfinished. Not because they sinned loudly, but because they practiced silence in the wrong direction. Francis warned that when the soul loses the habit of stopping, it also loses the ability to turn. Turning requires space. And space only exists when you pause. That is why he lived differently after that night. When something unsettled him, even faintly, he resisted the urge to explain it away. He did not demand clarity. He did not wait for certainty. He honored the interruption. Sometimes it led nowhere obvious. Sometimes it led to discomfort. Sometimes it led to change he did not understand until much later. But he learned something essential. Moments do not need to be understood to be obeyed. They need to be respected. And the ones that matter most rarely insist. They ask once. Quietly. Then they wait just long enough for you to decide who you trust, your momentum, or the pause. Near the end of his life, a brother asked Francis what frightened him most about the soul. Francis did not answer immediately. Then he said, that it can drift so gently that it never feels lost. That, he believed, was the true danger. Not falling. Not failing. But becoming very good at continuing. So if there is something in you right now, a hesitation, a nudge, a small resistance you've learned to move past. Do not label it. Do not analyze it away. Do not promise yourself you will return to it later. Later is where moments go to disappear. Saint Francis warned that the most decisive movements of a soul are not dramatic. They are almost forgettable. And once they are forgotten often enough, they stop presenting themselves at all. What remains feels like peace. But it is only quiet. And quiet, once practiced long enough, becomes direction. And direction, once settled into, becomes destiny. Without ever asking you again whether this is what you meant to choose.